Welcome to this College Sports Conversations podcast presented by the NCAA. I'm Corbin McGuire, the host for this conversation with Eugene Daniels, a former football player at Colorado State, who also served as the Division I SAAC chair during his time at Colorado State. Daniels is now a White House correspondent for Politico, and he also co-authors its flagship newsletter, Playbook. One important thing to note before we start the interview, this conversation was recorded in February, so some segments aren't as timely now as they were when they were recorded. For instance, Daniels had not been to a White House press briefing when we recorded, and he's since been to several and even flown on Air Force Two to cover the vice president. So just an FYI there. The bulk of the interview, however, is still very relevant, and it really speaks to how Daniels has carried his student-athlete experience forward into the professional world in a positive manner. So we hope you enjoy. From SAAC chair to the White House correspondent, just how did you get here?
So weird. It's a loaded question. How did I get here? So when I was in college and like football was kind of going not great because I had this torn shoulder. And I was changing my major from like political science to journalism. And I did every single thing you could do in student media. I did. We had like a TV show, like a anchor show. I was a news anchor, reporter. We had the newspaper, so I was on the editorial board. I had like a column. I had a radio show. I was on the magazine staff. And then I did like this weird late night talk show. And I was doing this at the same time. It was called Daniels After Dark, which is looking back, that is exactly what a college student would have called a late night. It was at like 9:30. It was like not super. Now I would consider it late night because I'm 32. But so, and I became obsessed with just kind of doing it all in journalism writ large. And at the same time, I was doing SAAC, both, at the school, at the conference level, and obviously being vice chair and then chair of the national SAAC, which I still look back as this kind of like, no matter, like I still look back like, wow, what a weird thing that happened in my life. Like I had never anticipated anything like that. And I think even to this day, I still talk to a lot of the people that that we were together and doing that with, some of the liaisons. And so I started my career in local television, and I had this vision in my head that I was going to go from, a smaller market to a medium size and a bigger market in New York. And I was going to be like Savannah Guthrie or Oprah or something like that. And that was kind of like, it's hilarious thinking like that is how a 21-year-old's like, I can do that. I can be Oprah. That makes a lot of sense. Someone needs to replace her. And so I was in local TV, and it was great. I learned a lot in local TV, but there are some things about it that I think I was ready for a change, and so I got into digital journalism. So I worked at Newsy and moved to Missouri for a year and a half, which was interesting because it was a college town. So I was in Columbia, and I was like 26. And being 26 in a college town when you're not in college, you're like, maybe college students are crazy. Maybe I was crazy as a college student. And so I was there for a year and a half and was covering politics at some point for them. I did the DNC. I interviewed Jill Stein, covered Ted Cruz. So like I'd done quite a bit in that 2016 primary for both Republicans and Democrats. And they started opening up a DC branch, and I was one of the people they moved down here, also because I told them I wanted to. Like, I was like, I want to move to DC. And they were like, interesting. And then they did. I moved here. And in 2018, Politico kind of snatched me up. And which was weird. I had never been poached before. I'd always been like most people, like begging for a job at different places. And so they poached me, and I started there in 2018 during the midterms on the video team. And I always loved this idea because my degree was in both like broadcast journalism and news editorial writing, I think is what it was called. It's been a while since I looked at it. It was like basically like writing for paper, for print, and also broadcast.
Yeah.
And I love the idea. I always loved the idea of doing both and so I basically asked, because I was on the 2020 team as the video person, and Andrew Yang wasn't being covered. He had just kind of like started to blow up. We didn't have anyone covering him. And so I was like, I'll cover him. He'll probably be out next week. You know, I'll write a few stories. And so then I started this kind of dual role of video and print. So I was covering a top 6 presidential candidate. I participated, you know, we hosted a Politico and PBS teamed up and hosted a Democratic primary debate. My candidate made it. So I played Andrew Yang for the moderators of the debate on, you know, with them like every Saturday and Sunday for weeks, like parroting what he would have said, which was just like sort of a strange experience and an amazing experience. We went to LA, obviously Iowa and New Hampshire and all of those good things. Sorry, that is my dryer. And all of that stuff. And I was still doing it as this kind of dual role of print and video. And my editor, one of the best people on earth, Carrie Buddha, we were talking about what I was going to do next. And she was like, do you want to stay in video? Do you want to do print? I was like, well, I don't want to do like the hard work of video because video is not easy to do, right? Like it's really hard. As someone who's done it for a long time. And so she kind of they pitched to me this idea of being on the White House team. 100% a surprise. That was not at all what I was thinking. I kind of pitched this thing where I would like basically rebrand this old brand that they had at Politico called Off Message. And I would like interview the new power players in DC kind of thing. It was kind of innocuous and nebulous. And they're like, well, how would you like to do that, but do it while covering the person who was a perfect example of new power player and cover Kamala Harris? And I was like, huh? Like I was like literally like, I'm sorry, what? And so then, you know, so then I was put on the White House team to cover the vice president, the second gentleman, and the first lady. And then a few weeks later, Carrie came to me and was like, so Playbook, which is our kind of like flagship newsletter. And she was like, we want you to be on Playbook. And I was like, what? And we were like, it was like kind of early, and it was like 8:30 conversation. And I really had not, like, I was already like getting my head around the White House gig, which was already stressful enough. And then they were like, oh, do you want to be on our biggest newsletter? And so I did that too. And so now I do both of those things. I straddle these two worlds, but you know, the stuff I do for the White House team goes in the Playbook, obviously. Yeah, I guess that's kind of a roundabout way to how I got here. It sounds like it sounds busy, actually. It sounds very busy now that I say it out loud.
It definitely sounds busy, and I think it's really cool. I'm a journalism guy, print journalism guy.
Right.
I mean, I didn't ever expect to end up on the PR side, and here I am. But
yeah,
it's just, you never know where it's going to take you, but you work hard enough, you get opportunities. So
and something that, I mean, the thing that I always think about, like for years, and I felt this when I was a student athlete, I felt this when I was on SAAC, like only smart people or only like the best get to be at the top, right? Or get to be in the big rooms. And like you will have, you know, they are the smartest, they are the best, you cannot touch them, you know what I mean? Like it is inherent in them that they get there. And I think the thing that I've learned over the last couple of years, the more, like I've gotten so lucky to work with some of the smartest journalists in DC, knowing some of the smartest journalists in DC, being in the room with a lot of these people. And the thing that I learned the most, and that I now share with people, is like, they're not that different. Like they are very smart, right? Yeah. But a lot of it is like luck and someone taking a chance on you. And I've taken that as like you know, we all get a little imposter syndrome. So I kind of take that to remind myself all the time, actually, when I'm in these rooms. I'm like, oh my God, how did I get here? That I got here just like everyone else did, by kind of like being ready when someone else is ready to give you a chance, right? Like being prepared, keeping your head down, not focusing on, bouncing to different places, which is kind of at the beginning of my career. I had this plan. I was going to go here and I was going to here and here. And so it's not that I now just like sit back and let my career happen, right? I concentrate on the job that I have. And the thing of, I'm juggling a lot. And what's funny is that as a student athlete, we juggle a lot, right? I've been trained my whole life to have an insane schedule. I'm not as good as, it'd be more helpful if somebody was reminding me to eat and drink water like they did in college. There's no one doing that. So I'm like having to force back, like, oh, right, it's 7:30, I haven't eaten anything. That would not have happened in college. But it's like that same juggling act, right? Like, and then everything that I added, like when I was SAAC chair, I traveled, I think the year I was vice chair, I remember Southwest, Southwest gives you that A list or whatever. Yeah. If you travel, I think it's like 25 flights. And I got that by like August or September when I was vice chair. And so I was like always going somewhere. And so being a student athlete, specifically being on SAAC, was like the thing that prepared me to juggle all of these things. And all of our liaisons were promising us that. They were like, this will pay off. And I was like, really, will it? Because I'm tired. And now I look back, I'm like, oh, Katie was right. Katie Willett was 100% right. It does prepare you in this way that you don't anticipate when you're a 21-year-old know-it-all like I was, that all of those little things and all of those little lessons will end up paying off, even though like being a college student athlete and being a White House reporter kind of basically have nothing to do with each other. All those lessons still come back every once in a while.
No, that's an awesome connection. And I really appreciate you weaving together those experiences without even me teeing it up. So,
well, because it is like I do, it really does prepare people for that. And I just being a student athlete in general is like the juggling and having to do all of that. But when you add on, all of these meetings, I learned how to be concise. I learned how to like perform is, I guess, probably the best, like perform in front of really important people and like pretend like I knew what I was talking about, even though I was like shaking and sweating, which is now basically most of my job, right? Like talking to important people while I'm sweating and shaking. Being organized and having, my to-do, having a notebook with my to-do list, which was something I learned, in those days. And it prepared me in a way that I didn't think it was going to. And I was confused then, and now I'm still very confused. Like any student athlete who's not doing SAAC in some way, on some level, is missing a huge opportunity to like gain more experience than you ever thought you could. Like even talking to like Mark Emmert, and like I talked to Mark Emmert. I remember having personal conversations with him and him remembering who I was because I was the student athlete advisory committee chair. You know what I mean? So it's like those kinds of things that do end up setting you up for talking to powerful people in Washington, D.C., right? Like he was the president of the NCAA, and at some point I probably will speak to Joe Biden. You know what I mean? And those kinds of things are nice to know that I got trained up a little bit in my early 20s.
For sure. And it may not, I had a question down and it may be less relevant considering you were a political science major at one point anyway. But just when I think of SAAC and the national, like our federal government, I kind of see, the NCAA, the way it's structured isn't all that different from the way our government's structured. You have committees, you have, certain processes to get legislation passed. Is there any connection between kind of just that foundational knowledge of how one works and maybe at all how that helped you kind of transition to this role?
Yeah, they move slow. Government and the NCAA move slowly, right? Like they're set up to do that. And it is, you kind of get this inside look as a, in your 20s of being an inside look at bureaucracy and how it works and the kinds of things that gum up the works. You know what I mean? The NCAA does great work. The government does great work. But a lot of the time, there are things that have nothing to do with the legislation at hand that gum it up and keep it from happening, right? And that learning that, because I stepped back from political science. I was a political science major and then changed over to journalism. So I minored in it. And so I got more out of watching bureaucracy at the NCAA than I did, honestly, from my classes, because it's like that firsthand knowledge and experience. Because I think when you're vice chair, you're on the legislative committee, and when you are the chair, you're on the leadership committee. I think that was how it worked back then. And this was also a time when the conversation around likeness was happening. And I remember being in a meeting when it was either one of the conferences or one of the big universities was doing a television channel. And we had a certain stance. I could not tell you what the stance was. Because again, 10 years. Wow, 10 years. It's been a long time. But like that, the stance that we had, and I was there on behalf of the student athletes to present that. And it wasn't leadership or legislative, it was like specifically this issue around universities and conferences having channels and what that meant and likeness and all of that. And I remember saying something, and like I said, I still get nervous talking in front of people, though it's it is like 85% of my job. It really takes up a lot of time. And now even when I go on CNN and MSNBC, I remember being just as scared of that as I was to talk in these meetings with these powerful people. And I presented our case, and someone said to me, "No offense, Eugene, but I have socks older than you." And I quipped back, because I was like really nervous. And I said, "Well, that just feels like you need to buy new socks." And everyone kind of laughed. And afterward, the person who said that, I'm not going to say who it was, but they reached out to our liaison, the SAAC liaison, and was like, "That Eugene's going places," because he's not scared of people. And so like I took from that lesson, again, that like all these people are just like us. Every student athlete who is scared to speak up, every human that is worried they're gonna look dumb or someone's gonna say something rude to them or something like that, like they also have those exact same fears. You know what I mean? And once you kind of get over this idea of adults being like the smartest among you when you're in college, you can kind of do anything, right? Like you can be respectful, obviously, because you're respectful to everyone, but like you realize like, oh, they're just like a normal person, and I can joke, and I can, you know what I mean? And I can disagree respectfully with them just like I can with my teammates or whatever.
For sure. I know the answer to this probably already, but is there a normal day as a White Horse?
Oh my God, no. And the White House Correspondent and the Playbook thing make it extra abnormal. And so, no, there's not a normal day. No, there's not a normal day at all, which I like, because the same thing could be said for student athletes. So I think I've always kind of been excited about this idea of like, what's happening today? And so what that forces you to do, and again, harkening back to my time as a student athlete, is that you kind of have to be centered in a way. Like you kind of have to have like a foundation of like organization, kind of knowing what you already want to get out of the day, because all these other distractions and other things, like Playbook comes out every day. Sometimes I'm the person that has to be like the last look in the morning. Well, before the editor, because I am not, he's in charge. And so I have to be up at 5 a.m, and then I do TV 7, 8 or something like that. And I also do some of the diversity and inclusion stuff at the organization. So I'm, so like I'm involved in all these different things, which I force myself to do as a student athlete, right? And so back to that juggling. And so yeah, the days are never, ever, ever the same. Like Wednesday is my day to go to the White House and to the White House press briefing for Politico, which I haven't done yet, so I'm like super excited. And so like that day will be completely crazy. And so I have no idea how that's gonna turn out, because like what questions am I going to ask? I don't know yet. Like, how are they going to react? Like, does that create news? All of these different things that are just kind of fascinating.
My wife and I, aside, are watching West Wing right now, going through it. She's like, "You're talking to somebody who's in the White House press corps?" I'm like,
yeah. It seems it's much cooler pre-pandemic, I'm sure. I think after the pandemic's over, it'll be a little bit more fun, but we can't go as often. And there's like all these procedures, and you have to get a COVID test before a certain time, and only a certain amount of people can get there. And I don't have a hard pass yet because I just started being on the White House team. And so we now have to wait for a hard pass. One time I forgot my ID. So it's just like things that you're learning a lot. Learning a lot.
No doubt, no doubt.
Yeah.
Can you take me back to how you got involved in SAAC? Was that kind of by accident too, or can you walk me through that backstory?
100% by accident. Angela Weiss was the SAAC, was kind of like in charge of SAAC at Colorado State. And whoever, I was a freshman, I think, freshman, like a redshirt freshman. Like it was my very first year in college. And then the second semester, whatever football player was supposed to go to the SAAC meeting, weekly or whatever it was, stopped going. Not a big surprise. So he stopped going, and they were like, "We need a nerd kid who will do it." And literally the coach was like, "Eugene, you're on SAAC," and I was like, "Okay." Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it means. So I started doing that. In that same semester for the Mountain West, I think they're just the MW right now, like just Mountain West and not the NWC. The Mountain West Conference had their SAAC meeting, and it was in Colorado Springs. My parents lived in Colorado Springs, so I was already going to be home for their May meeting. And so I just ended up going. Like, it was just like, good, he's here, send that nerd. And so I went to that. And I remember just being like obsessed with this idea of people who are the busiest, and you're doing the most for the universities, but you have like no power, having some kind of power, right? Like having some kind of say in the process. And I just got obsessed with that, and kind of just like, as I usually do, just kind of like glom onto things that my partner calls it micro obsessed and macro obsessed. So there's like little things that they last a week or two, but then there's some like Beyonce that lasts for decades, so it's like, that is kind of now that he said that, I'm like, wow, that is kind of how my life has always been. So I got macro obsessed with this idea of student athletes with some kind of voice. And that's exactly what I ended up doing. And I think the person who was our national SAAC representative was graduating. And so she was like, "Eugene, you're obsessed, you should do it." And I was like, "I'm not gonna no one's gonna pick me." And so I did. They did pick me, which I was quite surprised about. And my first meeting was a January convention meeting, I think. I'm pretty sure it was a January convention meeting. And I actually had to vote as a proxy. Because whatever they were supposed to vote on, our person couldn't be there, like the Mountain West Conference person couldn't be there. So they gave me the like voting device. I think I have a picture somewhere. And which, student athletes weren't technically supposed to do it, but because like I was picked by the conference, I was able to. I don't know if it's happened since then. Here, let me see if I have a picture, because I feel like I do.
That's a perfect one.
Yeah, I have a whole folder just called All Things National SAAC on here. So.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's some pictures I won't send you. I don't want to embarrass anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, there are pictures in here somewhere, and I just look at like a terrified. Yeah, this is it. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that was like they gave me that little device, and oh my God, I have like this baggy suit on. Jackie Jordan Kersey was there. Yeah, so it's just like this. And so after that, I realized that I just really like the idea of like 31 people coming from all over the country and just like finding a common ground and taking that to another group of people who you would have to fight with and finding common ground there and kind of like doing that around the NCAA, which I really love.
You mentioned some diversity and inclusion efforts within Politico. Your work, can you expand on that at all, or give some details, or is that kind of just?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's no secret that the industry I'm currently in is not exactly not exactly a diverse place, and Politico recognized that and has recognized that kind of before a lot of other places have, and started to, after, in 2020 with the reckoning on race that was happening, it was the question of what's happening inside here? Like, do people feel like they have more voice? Do they feel like there are enough people here? And so it was all about making the same kind of thing in SAAC, right? Just like finding people who maybe didn't have a voice, finding them, bringing them into the table, and giving them one. And I'm the chair of this recommendations subcommittee. We have all types of things that are going on that I can't really share, probably, but the goal is to make sure that Politico looks like the country so that we can report on the country, right? Like it is, and it's not just about the way people usually think, the short-sighted way people usually think of diversity, and that it's just about race or just about gender, right? It's about everything. It's about like, do we have any vets in here that can cover the VA? Like, do we are there people who have are from single parent households? Or do we have someone like who's covering immigration? Like all these different things. So it's good. It's again the same thing that I kind of always been interested in, which is helping people find a voice.
Yeah. Where do you trace that back to?
I guess feeling like I didn't have one growing up. I was my parents were military, mostly lived in the South.
Okay.
And I was like a gay kid. I didn't come out until I was 27, so super late. And I was like bullied mercilessly in elementary school. And so I think I've always been attracted to this idea of like helping, quote unquote, like the underdog. I don't know if that's maybe that's not the right term. The marginalized, people who aren't supposed to be there. You know what I mean? Who feel like the world doesn't want them to be in the room. And something that when you are SAAC chair, I don't know if they still do this, but when we used to leave, they give us this book and everyone write like these really sweet, it's like this huge picture book thing. And it's in my closet. And people write really nice things. And the thing that I kept seeing, and the thing that I think like that hit me the most, that like, I cried a lot, so it made me cry, was this idea of like, you made me feel like I belonged. And I think that has kind of like is other than my job, right? Like me as a human, like that is the thing I'm always striving for, is making sure that people feel like they belong wherever we are, wherever that place is.
That's really special. Yeah.
It's very cheesy.
Oh. Hey, the best stuff
it's for sure cheesy. It's very cheesy, but I'm fine with it being cheesy. I'm kind of cheese ball.
Yeah. I respect the cheese. No. Let's see what else. Curious, can you just run through your career at Colorado State? I know you got injured and that ended your career, but at what point in your career was that?
I tore my shoulder really early on. I tore my labrum and had to have shoulder surgery. It still kind of hurts, actually. I should go chase that surgeon down. But I went to Colorado State because I think I had 10 official offers from D1 institutions. And I went to Colorado State because the coaches that were there when I got there felt like a family. And I think that was kind of what I felt in high school. And that's what I was looking for. And that's like why I chose Colorado State, right? Like it was a smaller town. Everyone was obsessed with the school. Like that part of it was really nice. And like looking back, like I don't like the idea of regrets. Like I don't think about them in that way. I did not have the career in football that I thought like I probably wanted to. You know what I mean? It also was a surprise that I was going to college for football because I really didn't think of it until people were like, "Hey, you want to go to college for football?" And I was like, "Oh, I guess, sure." I didn't know that that was going to be a possibility. Like I just didn't like in my head. I was going to go to college, but I wasn't going to be able to play football. So when the opportunity kind of popped up, I was like, I will absolutely do that. And you know, my parents went through a divorce, and I was really distracted, and the shoulder thing happened. And so my football career was not what I wanted to be. I got out, I think I got out of it what I was supposed to, right? Which is all of the lessons that come with adversity, all the lessons that come with like camaraderie on a football team, all the things from SAAC and student media and all of those things. So I got everything I needed out of it, though, you know, I'm sure some people will look and say like, what a disappointing career. And I never thought of it that way, right? Like it felt like I had to, like I wasn't just there to play football. And there's nothing wrong with people that just play the sport, right? And focus on that sport because that's already enough to do, right? Like that is, like I said, like that's so much for that the student athletes are dealing with. But I felt like I was supposed to do more than that. And that's what I got out of college football.
Curious your take on just, you mentioned just finding your voice, and you know, student athletes across the country this past year have collectively found their voice in a number of areas, whether it be social and racial injustice, all sorts of inequities. Just from your perspective, how cool is it to see that group of people really find that collective voice and use it?
It's amazing because I remember us being that same age and people not taking us seriously. I remember, you know, the woman, you know, the person that said that thing about socks, like we heard stuff like that all the time. And dealing with know-it-all adults, of which I am now one, I'm sure. And so watching teenagers, young people that are student athletes who already know that there are so many eyes on them and that you have to behave, right? Like you can't embarrass the university and you can't shake things up. It's BS, right? Like it's BS. Your job is to represent the university. Your job is also to hold the university and the industry accountable. And that's what SAAC was about. I think, you know, there are times where I think we were too worried about the embarrassing the NCAA part, or too worried about being the kids that were like shaking the table. But I'm so thankful that young people now don't give a crap about that. Like they truly don't. Like they're like, we will kick down the door, we will build our own table, we will let you know what our issues are in this country. And specifically for student athletes, like there's only like a minority of the country that can understand what it's like to play in Division 1, 2, or 3, right? Like there's like it is not a huge group of people. And so when we would hang out with the Division 2 and Division 3 SAACs, though we were playing different sports, and you know there was always the fight over resources because it was Division 1 and there, you know, in those conversations, but there was always this through line of like, we have to find that voice. We have to like tell these people what we mean. And I think that's because of what happened in 2020, student athletes feel that even more. And I think if I had anything to say to people that work at the NCAA or that are at the institutions or at the conferences, is that you should be listening to student athletes because they know better than you. And I say that as someone who's been there, because you know, you would have a president tell you something like, that's not how it works on the ground at all, right? Like, it's not how it works. And you know, if the NCAA was this bureaucracy, the student athletes are like the mayors and local leaders that have to go talk to the governors and the congressmen and women and the other lawmakers and the senators and the president, right? Like, because we were on the ground and they are still on the ground. They know what's going on. They know how it actually plays out. And so it's a good thing that they're able to remind the people that make the legislation, that pass it, that have to go and implement it. Like, this is how it works for us, and it's not fair, or it works, but or it's, you know, like, here are the tweaks. And I think, you know, I always think it's a good thing that there's more people at a table, personally.
For sure. No, I think they've done a better job of getting that student athlete perspective, but I think there's so much more room to grow there.
100%. And I mean, we felt that. Like, we felt like people were like, sometimes we felt like we were just there for show. We've talked about that, you know. But I think there were times when we were like, oh, this is important. Like, this is really important work, and people are paying attention to us. And I think now it's that 100-fold.
For sure. Well, I kind of hit the main questions I had. Is there anything else as regard to kind of your story that you think I missed or you want to include?
I think no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say anything about your job, or just kind of anybody who's your famous interactions. You got those?
I think my favorite thing, and I'm scared to say it out loud because I feel like he'll follow, is like Lin-Manuel Miranda followed me recently. Right? But I'm so scared. I like go and check every. Matter of fact, I should check right now. If like she was like, oh, I did that on accident, because like we've never interacted. Yeah, still happening. Okay, good. And so I'm just like always. I'm like, whatever you tweet, don't piss off Lin-Manuel Miranda. So I think that's probably the one that I think about the most. Patricia Arquette and I tweeted at each other recently, which was weird. The actress. So I think it's interesting because, and the thing that I'm always coming back to, and I did this when I was on SAAC too, is like, why the hell does anyone want to know what I think? And I think like a lot of people have that, and that like now, like I go on CNN or MSNBC and they like ask me questions about the world, and I'm like, y'all got the right person. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like I'm still getting used to that part of the gig. Even like the fact that I like work at, like I've always wanted to work at a place like Politico, and I never thought it was going to happen. And so even though, you know, just working there, like I'm still kind of getting my head around that, and it's been 2.5 years. Like I'm still kind of like, oh my God, you work at one of the biggest news organizations in the country. Weird. And you're on like two of their biggest teams. Weird. And so I think, you know, the thing that I would say to student athletes and just young people in general is like, don't focus on like the naysayers, because there are plenty of those, and there are plenty of people, and sometimes it's yourself, that don't think you can do something. Focus on you, focus on like what you have to offer, because at some point someone will see it, and you just have to like keep pushing and keep pushing. And student athletes know how to do that better than anyone on this planet, I think.
For sure. Well said.
Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate that.
Of course. Thank you so much for including me.
No, thank you for being willing. And I know your life's crazy right now, but we'll keep following along. I'm an avid Politico reader, so.
Oh, thank you.
Excited to kind of see your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good one.
Yep, you too.
All right. Bye-bye.